During our family vacation, my daughter-in-law suddenly turned to my grandson and yelled, "She's not your real grandmother." I only smiled back because I knew that at dinner that night I would finally announce who would inherit my secret $50 million fortune. The mid-afternoon sun over the terrace of the Villa d'Este on Lake Como was blinding, reflecting off the water with a brilliance that usually brought me peace. But at exactly 2:14 p.m. on Tuesday, July 14th, it served only to illuminate the spittle flying from my daughter-in-law's mouth. We were 6 days into a 10-day family vacation that I was paying for, a trip that had already cost me $48,500 in accommodation fees alone, not including the private boat charters and the endless bottles of vintage Barolo that Camilla, my son's wife of 8 years, had been consuming with the voracity of someone who believed the tap would never run dry. My grandson, Leo, who is 7 years old and possesses the gentle, inquisitive eyes of my late husband, had simply asked a question. He had asked if I wanted to see the drawing he made of us. He called me Nana. That was the trigger. Camilla, wearing a designer kaftan that cost more than my first car, spun around from the railing where she had been taking selfies for the last hour. She marched over to Leo, snatched the paper from his hands, and yelled, "She is not your real grandmother. Stop calling her that. She is just the woman your grandfather married. She is nobody." The silence that descended on the terrace was absolute. My son, Julian, looked down at his shoes, a habit he had developed whenever his wife decided to unleash her venom. He did not defend me. He did not correct her. He simply swirled the ice in his glass. I looked at Leo, whose face was crumpling into confusion and tears. I didn't yell back. I didn't cry. I simply took a sip of my iced tea, adjusted my sunglasses, and smiled. It was a small, tight smile, devoid of warmth. Camilla mistook my silence for submission, a common error made by narcissists who mistake dignity for weakness. She didn't know about the portfolio. She didn't know about the patent. She didn't know that the modest pension she thought I lived on was actually a smokescreen for a net worth that exceeded $50 million. She thought I was a helpless old woman spending the last of her husband's life insurance. She had no idea that I was the architect of a fortune she was already spending in her head. And she certainly didn't know that the dinner reservation I had made for 8 p.m. that evening wasn't just a meal. It was an arraignment. I stood up slowly, smoothing the linen of my skirt. "We should get ready for dinner," I said, my voice steady and low. "I have an announcement to make regarding the estate." Camilla's eyes lit up. She smirked at Julian. She thought she had won. She thought the announcement was going to be me signing over the deed to my house in Connecticut, something she had been pressuring me to do for 6 months under the guise of simplifying my assets. She didn't realize that by the time dessert was served, her life as she knew it would be effectively over. To understand the magnitude of the trap I had laid, you have to understand the history of the abuse. I met Julian's father, Robert, when Julian was 4 years old. Robert was a widower, a kind but disorganized man who was struggling to raise a grieving boy. I stepped in. I wasn't the biological mother, but I was the one who packed the lunches. I was the one who sat in the emergency room at 3 a.m. when Julian broke his arm. I was the one who paid for his college tuition with the bonuses I earned from my career as a biochemical engineer. A career I kept deliberately vague at home because Robert was old-fashioned and preferred to think of me as an administrator. When Robert died 5 years ago, I was devastated. Julian, however, was managed by Camilla. Camilla is a woman who views people as resources to be mined. She married Julian 2 months after meeting him, right when his career as an architect was taking off, or so she thought. When the 2020 recession hit, Julian's firm went under. They came to me. "Just a bridge loan," Camilla had said, her eyes wide and pleading. "Just $20,000 to cover the mortgage." I gave it to them. Then it was $15,000 for a car. Then $12,000 for Leo's private school tuition, which I paid directly to the school because I didn't trust her. Over the last 5 years, I calculated that I had given them $142,500, and in return, I received subtle cruelty. I was excluded from Christmas photos. I was forgotten on Mother's Day. I was mocked for my frugality because I drove a 10-year-old Honda and clipped coupons. "It's embarrassing," Camilla would whisper to Julian loud enough for me to hear. "She sits on that insurance money and lives like a pauper." The irony, of course, was that the insurance money was gone in a year. The money I had was mine. In 1998, I had developed a filtration method for synthetic insulin. I held the patent. I licensed it to a major pharmaceutical company. The royalties were astronomical. I reinvested 90% of it into diversified index funds and real estate trusts, all held under an LLC named Veritas Holdings. I never told Robert the full extent of it because we didn't need it, and I didn't want to change the dynamic of our marriage. After he died, I planned to leave it all to Julian, but then I watched. I watched Camilla isolate him. I watched her spend his paycheck before it hit the account. I watched her treat Leo like an accessory, and I started a file. For 3 years, I documented every request for money. I saved every text message where she insulted me. I recorded the dates and times she refused to let me see Leo unless I brought a check. I wasn't just a grandmother. I was a forensic accountant of my own exploitation. The breaking point came 3 months ago. I was hospitalized for a minor cardiac arrhythmia. I was in the hospital for 2 days. Julian came once, for 20 minutes. Camilla didn't come at all, but she did call my lawyer, Mr. Sterling, to ask if the will was up to date and if she had power of attorney. Mr. Sterling, a man with 40 years of experience who makes $900 an hour to protect people like me from people like her, called me immediately. She's circling, he said. She thinks you're dying, and she wants to know if she can sell the house before the body is cold. That was the moment the grief turned into strategy. I told Sterling to draft a new trust. I told him to liquidate the liquid assets and move them into a protected structure. I told him I was taking them on one last vacation. I needed to see if there was any redemption left in Julian. I needed to see if he would stand up for the woman who raised him. Today, on the terrace, he failed the test, and Camilla sealed her fate. I dressed for dinner with the precision of a soldier putting on armor. I wore a black silk dress that I had bought in Paris 20 years ago, timeless and severe. I put on the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. I looked in the mirror. I saw a woman of 68 who had been underestimated for too long. I saw the nobody Camilla had sneered at, and I saw the CEO of Veritas Holdings. The restaurant was located on the edge of the lake, accessible only by boat. It was the kind of place that didn't put prices on the menu for the ladies. We sat at a corner table with a panoramic view of the water, the lights of the villas twinkling in the twilight. Camilla ordered the lobster risotto and a bottle of Dom Perignon without asking the price. She was giddy, her earlier outburst forgotten in the anticipation of the payout. Julian looked nervous. He kept glancing at me, sensing the shift in my atmospheric pressure. Leo sat quietly coloring, sensing the tension as children always do. The appetizers arrived. Camilla raised her glass. "To family," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "And to the future. Julian tells me you want to talk about the estate, Margaret. We think it's really wise. You know, assisted living is so expensive these days. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." The condescension was breathtaking. She was talking about putting me in a home. She was talking about seizing control. I put down my fork. I signaled to the waiter to pour the water. "Yes," I said, "I want to talk about the future. Specifically, the future of the $52 million currently held in my name." The sound of Camilla choking on her champagne was audible. She coughed, sputtering, grabbing a napkin. Julian dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china. "50 million, Julian whispered. "Mom, what are you talking about? Dad didn't have that kind of money." "No," I said calmly. "He didn't. I did, and I do." I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a thick leather folder. I placed it on the table. "This is a certified statement of net worth from Veritas Holdings. I am the sole proprietor. The funds are derived from a patent I filed in 1998. It has been accumulating interest and royalties for 25 years. Camilla snatched the folder. Her hands were shaking. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the numbers, the balance sheet, the real estate portfolio, the blind trust. Her face went from flush to a sickly pale gray. She looked up at me, and for the first time, there was no arrogance. There was only a terrifying naked greed. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Margaret, Mom, why? Why didn't you tell us? We could have had a different life." "You had a life," I said. "You had a life where I paid your mortgage, where I paid for your cars, where I paid for your son's education, and in exchange, you treated me like a nuisance. You treated me like an ATM with a pulse." "That's not true," Camilla protested, her voice rising, drawing stares from the neighboring tables. "We love you. We were just stressed. You know how hard it is. Julian, tell her." Julian said nothing. He was staring at the folder, his face a mask of shock and regret. He was doing the math. He was calculating every missed birthday, every unanswered call, every time he let his wife insult me. He realized the cost of his cowardice. "But it's okay," Camilla said, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "We're family. We can start over. This changes everything. We can move you into the big suite. We can get you the best care. We can." "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it stopped her dead. "You are not listening. I said I wanted to talk about the future of the money. I didn't say you were part of it." I opened the folder to the second section. It was a legal document titled Irrevocable Trust Agreement. Today, after the incident on the terrace, I instructed Mr. Sterling to execute the final version of this trust. It creates a generation-skipping transfer. The entire estate, the patent, the holdings, the cash, is now placed in a trust for the sole benefit of Leo. I looked at my grandson, who was happily eating a breadstick, oblivious to the fact that he was now one of the wealthiest children in the state. "Leo?" Camilla shrieked. "He's 7. He can't inherit $50 million. He can," I corrected her, "and he will, but he cannot access the principal until he is 30 years old. Until then, the trust is managed by a professional trustee, Mr. Sterling's firm. The trust will pay for his education, his medical needs, and a modest living allowance. It will not pay for his parents' mortgages. It will not pay for luxury vacations. It will not pay for designer caftans." I looked directly at Camilla. "You said I wasn't his real grandmother. You were very clear about that. So, logically, I am not obligated to support his real mother. The trust documents specifically exclude you and Julian from receiving a single cent. You are bypassed completely." The silence at the table was heavy, suffocating. Camilla looked like she had been shot. Julian looked like he wanted to die. "Mom," Julian croaked, "please, you can't do this. We have debts. We were counting on the house. The house is already sold," I said, delivering the final blow. "I signed the closing papers electronically this morning. The proceeds have been added to Leo's trust. You have 30 days to vacate. I suggest you start looking for a rental. I hear the market is quite competitive." The explosion was immediate. Camilla stood up, knocking her chair over. "You bitch," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You evil, manipulative bitch! You let us on. You let us think you were poor. You owe us. I raised your grandson, and I paid for it, I said, remaining seated. I paid for every single thing in your life for the last 5 years, and today, the bill came due. The maitre d' approached, looking alarmed. Madame, is there a problem? Yes, I said, standing up and placing my napkin on the table. My guests are leaving. I will be finishing my dinner alone. Please see them out. Camilla tried to grab the folder, but I pulled it back. If you touch this, I said, Mr. Sterling will file a restraining order so fast your head will spin, and I will cut off the only thing I have left to give you my silence regarding Julian's tax returns. Julian looked up sharply. He knew what I meant. He knew I knew about the creative accounting he had done with the loans I gave him. He grabbed Camilla's arm. Camilla, stop, he hissed. We have to go. Now. She struggled, screaming obscenities, telling everyone in the restaurant that I was a thief, a liar, a monster. But Julian dragged her out. I watched them go. I watched my son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved, walk out of my life, dragged by the woman who had destroyed him. When they were gone, the restaurant was quiet. The other diners were staring. I didn't care. I sat back down. The waiter, a young man who looked terrified, poured me a fresh glass of wine. I am sorry for the disturbance, I said. I will cover the bill for the surrounding tables. He nodded, wide-eyed. Of course, madame. Are you all right? I looked out at the lake. The moon was rising, casting a silver path across the water. I thought about Robert. I thought about the years of silence. I thought about the lie I had lived to protect a fragile masculinity that wasn't even mine. And then I looked at the empty chair where Leo had been sitting. I would miss him. That was the only pain. But I knew the trustee would ensure I had visitation rights. I had built that into the contract too. Yes, I said, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted like nectar. It tasted like truth. I am perfectly all right. In fact, I have never been better. The aftermath was exactly as messy and litigious as Mr. Sterling had predicted. Camilla filed a lawsuit 3 weeks later, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. She tried to argue that I was senile, that I had been manipulated by my lawyers, that I had promised them the money verbally. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to claw back a future she felt entitled to. But I was ready. During the deposition, Mr. Sterling produced the binder. It was 3 inches thick. It contained the transcripts of the voicemail she had left me. It contained the text messages where she called me a useless old hag. It contained the receipts for the $142,500 I had already given them. And, most damning of all, it contained the video from the restaurant security camera capturing her screaming that I wasn't the real grandmother while I sat calmly eating my dinner. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly dealt with elder abuse cases before, dismissed the suit with prejudice. She also ordered Camilla to pay my legal fees. Since Camilla didn't have the money, they had to declare bankruptcy. They lost their house. They lost their cars. Julian finally woke up, or perhaps he just realized that the ship was sinking and he needed to swim. He filed for divorce 6 months later. He moved into a small apartment. He got a job at a firm, starting from the bottom. He called me once, a year later. I'm sorry, he said. I know, I replied. But sorry doesn't change the trust, Julian. You have to earn your own life now. 5 years have passed since that night on Lake Como. I am 73 now. I live in a condo in Manhattan overlooking Central Park. I travel 4 months of the year. I have a new circle of friends, women who are independent and interesting and who like me for my mind, not my checkbook. Leo is 12. He is at a boarding school in New England, the best in the country, paid for by the trust. I see him once a month. We have lunch. He knows I am wealthy, but he doesn't know the extent of it. He knows me as the grandmother who sends him books on engineering and tells him stories about his grandfather. He doesn't mention his mother much. She lives in Florida now, I believe. I don't ask. I don't care. The silence in my life is not lonely. It is peaceful. It is the silence of a ledger that has finally been balanced. I learned that money cannot buy love, but it can buy safety. It can buy justice. And it can buy the freedom to be exactly who you are, without apology. I finish my coffee, look out at the autumn leaves turning gold in the park, and smile. The nobody is doing just fine. The silence in the mahogany-paneled water taxi back to the Villa d'Este was heavier than the humid night air clinging to the surface of Lake Como, a suffocating vacuum where the only sound was the drone of the engine and the soft, rhythmic slapping of water against the hull. It was 10:42 p.m. on Tuesday, July 14th, and the battle lines had been drawn not in sand, but in the ledger of a trust fund that effectively erased my son and his wife from my financial existence. Julian sat across from me, his face a pale mask of shock illuminated intermittently by the passing shore lights, while Camilla stared out into the darkness, her knuckles white as she gripped her designer clutch, calculating the magnitude of the loss she had just sustained. She didn't speak to me. She didn't look at me. She was in a state of processing, moving through the stages of grief for a fortune she had never earned but fully expected to spend. When the boat docked, I didn't wait for them. I stepped onto the pier with the assistance of the captain, tipped him 50 euros, and walked straight to the concierge desk. I will be checking out tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., I told the night manager, Marco, who knew me by name. Please arrange a separate car for me to Milan Malpensa. The other members of my party will be responsible for their own incidental charges from this point forward. I went to my suite, packed my belongings with the efficiency of a woman who has spent a lifetime optimizing industrial chemical processes and slept for 6 hours. The next morning, I flew first class on Emirates. I left them to figure out out their own logistics, knowing that the credit card on file for their room was Julian's, a card that had a limit of $15,000, which they had likely already exceeded with the room service and spa treatments I had previously agreed to cover, but had now instructed Marco to bill separately. It was a petty maneuver, perhaps, but pettiness is the privilege of the solvent. When I landed at JFK, I didn't go to the house in Connecticut. I went to the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, where I had booked a suite for the next month. I needed a fortress. I needed a command center, because I knew, with the certainty of a scientist observing a chemical reaction, that the explosion at dinner was just the catalyst. The shockwave was coming. It arrived 3 days later, in the form of a barrage of text messages and voicemails from Julian. He sounded desperate, manic, oscillating between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of insanity. "Mom, you can't be serious about the house," he left in a voicemail at 3:14 a.m. "We have nowhere to go. The lease on the cars is up next month. You're ruining us over one bad dinner." He still didn't get it. It wasn't one dinner. It was 5 years of erasure. It was 1,000 cuts. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to Mr. Sterling with a single note: proceed with the eviction. The eviction process in Connecticut is complex, requiring specific notices and timelines, but Mr. Sterling had prepared the notice to quit weeks ago, anticipating this very outcome. It was served to them by a constable the moment they pulled into the driveway of my house upon their return from Italy. The constable reported that Camilla threw the papers onto the lawn and screamed that she had squatter's rights, a legal term she clearly learned from television and misunderstood entirely. They had 30 days. 30 days to dismantle the life I had subsidized. During those 30 days, the psychological warfare intensified. Camilla launched a smear campaign. She called my friends, my distant relatives, even my former colleagues, telling them that I had developed dementia, that I was being manipulated by predatory lawyers, and that I had abandoned my grandchild. It was a painful narrative to counter, but I didn't fight it with words. I fought it with silence and security. I hired a private security firm to monitor the Connecticut property, ensuring they didn't strip the fixtures or damage the structure in their rage. The reports I received were grim. They were selling furniture. They were selling the artwork I had collected over 40 years. I let them. I considered it a severance package. Let them have the sofas. I had the freedom. The lawsuit was filed on August 24th, exactly 10 days after they were legally removed from the property by the sheriff's department, a scene I chose not to witness, but which was described to me as undignified. The suit, Julian and Camilla Thorne v. Margaret Thorne and Veritas Holdings, made 3 primary claims: breach of verbal contract regarding the house, undue influence regarding the trust, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were suing me for $10 million. They had found a lawyer, a man named Barry Glazer, who advertised on billboards and specialized in high-conflict family disputes, who was clearly working on contingency. They were betting everything on a settlement. They thought I would pay to make the embarrassment go away. They forgot that I had spent my career in a laboratory, where contamination must be isolated and neutralized, not ignored. I instructed Mr. Sterling to accept no settlement offers. We were going to discovery. The discovery phase is where the truth stops being a concept and starts being a document. We subpoenaed their financial records. We subpoenaed their text messages. We subpoenaed their emails. What we found was not just ingratitude. It was financial pathology. Julian had been borrowing money from his firm's escrow account to pay off gambling debts I knew nothing about. Camilla had 3 separate credit cards in Julian's name that he didn't know existed, with balances totaling $85,000, mostly spent on luxury goods and influencer coaching. They were drowning. They saw my fortune not as a blessing, but as a life raft, and they were furious that I had pulled it away. The deposition took place on a rainy Tuesday in November. I sat across a long mahogany table from them. Camilla looked haggard, her roots showing, wearing a suit that was clearly old. Julian couldn't look me in the eye. Mr. Glazer began with a blustering opening statement about familial duty and promises made. Then Mr. Sterling opened the binder. It was the physical manifestation of my memory. He laid out the timeline. "Mrs. Thorne," Sterling asked Camilla, his voice mild, "on December 25th, 2022, did you send a text message to your friend stating, 'The old hag is finally asleep. Time to drink the good wine?'" Camilla turned red. I was venting. "And on March 4th, 2023, Sterling continued, flipping a page, "did you email a real estate agent inquiring about the market value of the Connecticut property, stating, 'The owner is failing fast, looking to list by summer'?" Camilla went silent. "And finally," Sterling said, playing the video from the restaurant on a large monitor, "can you explain to the court how yelling, 'She is not your real grandmother,' aligns with your claim of a close, loving familial bond that implies a verbal contract for inheritance?" The video played in the silent conference room. The sound of her screaming was shrill and ugly. Julian put his head in his hands. Glazer looked at his clients, then at the mountain of evidence, and realized he had bet on the wrong horse. The deposition lasted 4 hours. By the end, they were decimated. We didn't just defend, we counterattacked. Mr. Sterling pointed out that Julian's use of company funds was a felony. He pointed out that their debts rendered them insolvent. He made it clear that if they pursued this to trial, we would not only win, but we would turn over the evidence of Julian's embezzlement to the district attorney. It was the nuclear option, and I didn't hesitate to put the key in the ignition. They dropped the lawsuit 3 days later. But the victory wasn't just legal. It was the final severance of the cord. The fallout destroyed what was left of their marriage. The stress of the eviction, the exposure of the debts, and the realization that the golden parachute was gone turned them against each other. I heard from mutual acquaintances that the arguments were visceral. Julian blamed Camilla for her mouth. Camilla blamed Julian for his spine. They filed for divorce in January. It was a messy, public dissolution of a partnership built on greed. Julian lost his job when the firm conducted an internal audit prompted, I suspect, by the rumors circulating during the lawsuit. He avoided prison only by paying restitution, which he managed by liquidating his 401k and selling every asset he had. He is now 42 years old, living in a studio apartment, working as a junior draftsman, starting over from zero. It is a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. As for Camilla, she moved back to her parents' house in Florida. She tried to launch a lifestyle brand on social media, framing herself as a victim of a toxic mother-in-law. But without the backdrop of my house and my money, her content lacked the aspirational quality her audience demanded. She faded into the digital noise. But the most important part of the aftermath was Leo. The trust I established was ironclad, but it also contained a provision for a child advocate, a neutral third party appointed to ensure his emotional well-being was not collateral damage in his parents' war. I petitioned the court for visitation rights, arguing that I was the only stable financial and emotional presence in his life. Given the parents' instability and the documented neglect, the judge agreed. I see Leo every other weekend. We don't go to Lake Como. We go to museums. We go to the library. We walk in the park. I don't buy him expensive toys. I buy him experiences. I put money into his trust. He is healing. He asks about his parents, and I tell him the truth, that they are working on themselves, and that adults sometimes make mistakes that take a long time to fix. I don't poison him against them. I don't need to. The reality of his life compared to the peace of our time together is evidence enough. I am sitting now in my library in the Manhattan condo. It is quiet. The only sound is the ticking of the clock and the hum of the city 30 floors below. The file labeled Thorn v. Thorn is closed and archived in the bottom drawer, next to the patent that started it all. I am alone, yes, but I am not lonely. Loneliness is the feeling of being unseen in a crowded room. Solitude is the luxury of being exactly who you are, surrounded by the things you have earned. I pick up the phone and dial the number for the boarding school in New England where Leo will be starting next fall. I need to confirm the tuition payment. The bursar answers on the second ring. This is Margaret Thorne, I say, my voice steady and clear. I am calling to settle the account. It is the best feeling in the world. To settle the account, to close the book, to know that while they fought for the scraps of my past, I secured the integrity of the future. I take a sip of my tea. It is Earl Grey, hot and strong. It tastes like victory.